Hello and welcome back everyone to the Big Data Days 2024. In the next hour, we're going to dive into one of my absolute favorite topics, and we're going to be doing that in the form of a panel discussion. And with me today, I have a truly global panel of experts who are representing basically the entire world, ranging from Australia, Singapore, Italy, and myself based in Malaysia. So we're going to look at different points of view, specifically around upscaling for data democracy. Before we get started, I would like to remind the audience that the whole point of this session is that you can interact and pick the brain of these experts. In order to do this, I'm going to strongly recommend you to type your questions in the question box that you see on the right-hand side, just like yesterday, and I will be moderating some of the questions. Note that you can upvote or downvote questions that you would like to see answered. We only have a short hour, so it's typically impossible to do everything, but I'll try to get as many questions answered by everyone. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. And I'm going to start with Nino Letteriello, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, who is the president of the Data Management Association in Italy. First time here at Big Data Days. So Nina, would you be so kind to provide the audience a brief introduction of your experience and your role?
Of course, and welcome and thank you for having me. I'm currently calling from Italy, so I understand for most of you is evening now, but it's 1 p.m. for us. I'm Nino Letteriello. I'm a dual Italian-British citizen, and I'm representing the Data Association Management, DAMA. Some of you may know, and we'll have an opportunity to further discuss later on. It is a non-for-profit association that gathers best practice in the world of data and has been doing so for the last 40 plus years. In addition to my work in this voluntary association, I have a background in project management and I worked for more than 15 years on Olympic and Paralympic Games and other major events, as well as on major transport. And in that, in the last 5 years, I'm focusing more on education and training. I've been a lecturer for MIT for design thinking, human-centric design, applied to digital transformation projects. So I will try to bring this human factor into the discussion today as well.
Well, and that's especially why we invited you today, because that human factor combined with the technology that we're going to talk about is leading towards a lot of questions or problems, if you want to call it. Very excited to pick your brain on this. My next panelist is somebody who's been with us before on Big Data Days. Jean-Michel, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Jan-Willem. Hello, everyone. It's evening in Singapore. I've been in Singapore for about 13 years. I jumped into data analytics 14 years ago, and today I lead as a data analytics technology practice and AI at Google, where I've been with Google for about a year and a half. My background is application integration, message-oriented middleware a long time ago, and I jumped into analytics a while back with 7 years of experience in data analytics project implementation on AWS first, in AWS Professional Services, then on Azure with Databricks, and then now helping my customers at Google. So good evening, everyone.
Good, and I'm very glad to have you, Jean-Michel. And then last but not least, also for the second time, if I'm correct, on Big Data Days is Kieran Hagan, who is joining us from Down Under.
Yes, hello, thank you, Jan, and hello, everyone. I'm joining you from Sydney. My name is Kieran Hagan. I've worked with IBM for about 18 years in data and AI technologies. And I guess you could call me an evangelist, if you like. I help educate our customers and partners on technologies around data and AI and our unique offerings like WatsonX. And most recently, I've been explaining to friends and family how generative AI works. So very welcome to be here today and help in any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Kieran, and super happy to have you back. Thanks everyone for this brief and very good introduction. I think it's fair to say that we really have a truly global panel of experts, and we're going to dive right away into some questions. Now, the reason that I chose the title of this panel, and everyone can see it here on the slide on the screen, it's Upskilling for Data Democracy. Over the last two days, we have heard a lot around new technology. We dived into some really technical sessions around how it works. We talked also about the more organizational aspects like IT governance, data management, and everything that comes around that. One common part that is true in all of those sessions is that ultimately, no matter how fancy and good the technology is going to be, we need people who are going to be using this. And in order to do that, the requirements for people to use that technology, and that's what we refer to as citizen data scientists, is increasing, or at least the need for that is increasing. So I'd like to start with a question on how can we make sure that everyone in this world can stay up to date with these technologies. And let me go back from where we last ended. Kieran, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So keeping up to date with these technologies, if we think about the citizen data scientists, I sometimes see them the future information consumers. Sometimes we call them knowledge capital workers, and really it's working with information. And what we've seen rise very rapidly is the technologies that help people work with information have become much more accessible. And if you think about things like ChatGPT, anyone who's used it, then children to grandparents who might have used a prompt, are effectively almost a prompt engineer. That's almost an entry point now to being a knowledge capital worker. So keeping pace with these technologies is interesting because they are becoming more accessible and pervasive. So I think the accessibility is very much improving, but it's the education and awareness that people can use these tools is, if you like, the entry point to becoming those kind of citizen data scientists. The people who understand those tools will then be able to leverage those insights. So I think it's an accessibility point right now.
Absolutely. But to kind of build upon that directly, isn't that right away also where the big risk is? Because it's so easy to use all these tools. People can go and basically type and prompt anything they like. They can create any picture they want. So to what extent do we will need to deal with the risk? And maybe this is a good question for Jean-Michel, because you're involved with the creation and development of these technologies. Do you take that into consideration? And if yes, to what extent?
That's an interesting question. Since technology exists, like you remember, maybe you don't remember when electricity has been invented, so to speak. That was kind of long time ago. There was risk. People were extremely afraid of electricity that is going to kill everybody. And we manage. We use technology for what it does best. We didn't use for what it doesn't do well. And I think over the past 30 years or 40 years of rapid evolution of technology, I think we can keep those principles of how do we want to use the technology. And the same technology can be used to do very bad things and can be used to do very good things. It's the exact same technology. And it's about a principle. Today we tend to think about AI principle, but it's about principle of collecting information. What do we want to do with that information? You collect information to to run out of people to do bad things, or you want to collect information to improve the life of the same people. It's exactly the same information. The usage is different. So I think we should keep in mind the principle of use of information. For example, at Google, we're trying to make information accessible and useful for everyone, and that didn't really change the past 25 years. Now it's tricky to make information accessible for everyone, and then kind of guarantee that this information will be used for the good things. In fact, you cannot guarantee. That's why you have laws, you have regulation, regulators that make sure that people using technology, regardless of the technology, use in a technology that makes sense. Same with self-driving car. We are still seeing challenges with self-driving car. You do have regulation. You cannot just put the tech in a car and off you go everywhere in the world. That's why you have regulation, because that technology works very well in some cases and not at all in other cases. So we don't want to harm people. So I think we should keep in mind those principles, regardless of the type of technology that we use. Now with AI, especially with Gen AI, it becomes a little bit trickier to kind of make sure that the information is used in the right way. So for example, in Gen AI, you can enter any type of prompt, etc., but in an enterprise setting, you never access directly to the prompt. It goes through an application that is filtering what you enter. That goes into a prompt. Then the prompt is improved by the LLM itself. Then it goes to the backend to trigger something. Then when the something is triggered, it goes back, is being filtered again, maybe cancelled, or then served to the users. So in an enterprise setting, like typically like a bank, you cannot cheat and do whatever you want with a prompt. Why? Everything is logged. Everybody knows what you did. And if you're trying to cheat system, to trying to bypass things, well, these days, your job is on the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially those two elements, we're going to dive a little bit deeper is in terms of the productivity, but also some of the risk that's involved in a second. But before I do that, I'd like to move to Nino. You're representing DAMA, an organization that I think you mentioned was 40, 50 years old, a long time at least. When it was founded, artificial intelligence didn't exist, or at least not to the extent that it is today. So you must get a lot of questions around how do you deal with this from a data management perspective, a people perspective, because DAMA is quite famous for their standards. So what's your take on this?
I think there are, I apologize, before I disappear for a second. I hope my connection is fine. You can hear me okay now. But
it's perfectly fine.
I think it's a little bit about joining the dots about what JM and Kieran also mentioned before. There is some element of fundamentals education and fundamentals awareness, learning, which are still applicable. So you correctly said DEMA was born in 1980 and is current present. I think we are talking about 500,000 individual associate plus 300 company globally. And for the purpose, these are a community of practice that try to put this best practice together. And what some of the learning, some of the key messages, it kind of remained the same 40 years down the line, such as the aspect of there is technology, there is the human aspect, but also it is business driving. Let me put it. It's business decision, business strategies that drive data and digital and technology transformation, not the other way around. And what I mean by this is we need data to make better decisions. We need technology to enable those better decisions faster and more accurately, but still our business decision. You need to be clear on what your business is doing, what your business is trying to achieve. You need to be able to query, to question the tool that you have available, this being traditional tool, be advanced analytics, be whatever kind of typology. So that is remains, I think, at core, and that is one of the things I kind of a preamble of even entering into the speaking about the world of data. And I think in this aspect, DEMA has been always quite an advocate for data as an asset, for the role of the chief data officer, CDAO, and whatever we want to call it, and his place into the board, etc., because this is driving change and drive transformation. what I was talking, where I think the link between the two, there is an element of awareness. One of the examples I always bring is what we mean by data quality. It seems quite, it's very, very easy to spot when data is not of good quality. It's much more difficult to define what data quality means. So everybody can receive the report and say this is wrong, and this, unfortunately, is a kind of a vicious circle. What is really triggers, because then you start to don't have trust into the data you receive, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, I still think certain element of when we talk about data management and we talk about data quality is really try to understand, have some common glossary of terms, some common understanding of some of these key concepts. When we talk about data quality, what does it mean? And of course, framework, international framework and standard can give you an help us with that. And this, I think, is unchanged, as a kind of unchanged in the last 30, 40 years, the need of having common vocabulary, common knowledge of some basic principle, try to avoid the usual pitfall or misunderstanding. I think these remain, technology will help, but it won't solve. So I think that that is one element of it.
Very interesting, because
yes.
What I hear both you and also Jean-Michel saying with the example from electricity, it's a new technology, but we've had new technologies for a long time, and ultimately it's just how we as a society are going to be dealing with this. And that's a very interesting perspective, because for the last day and a half I have been hearing every speaker claiming that this is the most revolutionary technology that we've ever seen. But ultimately, the people side of things, I think, is very similar also, as you just mentioned, with a history plus. It's just a new way of looking at things. We're going to dive into that in a second, and we're also going to be diving especially into the trust element, because that's, I think, one of the key aspects that people are afraid of, or at least have questions about. But before I do that, I'd like to right away answer some questions, because I already see quite a lot of questions coming in on the right-hand side. So I'd like to start with one that has the most votes. Let me have a quick look. That one is from Katina. I'm going to project it on the screen for everyone. And the question is, what strategies can leaders implement to build more data-centric culture that embraces citizen data scientists and encourages more collaborative, data-driven decision-making? Now, I know from my previous talks that Jean-Michel is very keen on data culture from our previous episodes. So would you like to take this question?
Sure, I'm happy to. It comes with transparency, data culture. That means most of the time you take a decision and you try to find data to back it up. You don't make a decision. Organization don't always make a decision based on data. They make a decision and they ask for data to make sure that their kind of gut feeling is the right one. So that means transparency on the organization. That's the first thing. And then practitioners. People dealing with data should be part of some communities because it requires practice. So that means each time you want to do something, or you say, we have many customers who are purchasing this product. My first question is, what is many? How many? How many today, this month, last year? You mentioned this product. It's the same product. It's a product with a derivative product. I mean, be more specific. And when people start to be a little bit crisper on what they say, what they do, then the data culture start to kick in. But it's kind of a muscle that people need to manage and to grow, and it takes time. It took me some time. I was a typical IT person, software engineering by training, And then I jump into data dealing with business people. And business people, they have questions like, how are you going to generate a 20% uplift with that premium product on my wealthy customer segment? And we need to answer with, what do you mean by 20% uplift? Is it a monthly revenue? Is it a yearly revenue? By then, do you want to do that? Is it a ramp-up time? And then your segment. How do you define your segment? How many people? So one way to start is ask always about numbers. There is nothing few, many, from time to time. Those doesn't work anymore in a data world. So dealing with numbers all the time. And that's a muscle that people can train themselves on. And this is with some community. And in the next meeting, for example, you ask simple questions. Somebody is going to say, we have many customers who are churning. How many customers? And how do you define churn? Customer who didn't purchase, we stopped to purchase last month, last 2 months, last 3 months. Those simple questions. And by asking question after question from time to time, people start to be more aware of the precision they need to bring to the table to have a better decision making. That would be my short answer.
Well, I fully agree, and especially that part of knowing which questions to ask and knowing what is the answer that you are ultimately looking for based on the facts that you're looking for. I think that that's probably one of the most critical aspects that you see with the new technology that we're discussing these days. In line with that, and let me move to Kieran for this next question. We see that there's been a lot of focus around the way that these models are being trained. Obviously, and this has been the discussion already for a few years, if there's no quality data going in, you're also not going to get a lot of quality answers. But we're also going to a society or a world where people really trust the outcomes that are created by these kinds of models. In one of the presentations that was delivered yesterday, I saw even some facts from Gartner that they say, you know, the 50% of people already trust the answers that are coming out of these generative AI parts. And it becomes much more difficult to differentiate between real versus fake, and to kind of build it even up one step further. There's a lot of synthetic data now being generated, which is then used again for generating new kinds of answers, which basically complicates everything even further. Now, you already kind of see where I'm coming from, because in this panel, we're going to specifically look around that truth question and how do we make sure that data citizens understand what is required of them. Working for a large technology provider and being an evangelist, I'm quite sure you get this question a lot. How can we trust the answers that are coming out of these kinds of big data systems, even especially, let me put that side note, if I don't have that IT technical background and I have no clue on how a Gen AI model works or is being trained?
It's a very good point. And I think it's one of the challenges right now with adoption. I mean, and to springboard from the previous conversation with JM and about businesses adopting these tools, I encourage curiosity, right? Data curiosity in organizations to experiment with these tools. But by the same token, you should also be curious and skeptical about the answers as well, right? And some of the challenges we have, and this might be interesting for JM, is some people thought these tools, like a prompt, was like a Google search history. So they would automatically assume it was inherently true. But what we've actually got now is this concept of hallucination, right? Which is being repurposed on some of these outputs. So very convincing, occasionally factually incorrect answers. Now, some of this is not new. And to Nino's point, data scientists like to harvest as much information as they could to try and drive models. And what we found, and we did this as well with Watson in the Jeopardy program, is it is not the size of the corpus that improves the accuracy of these models or the outputs. It's actually the curation and the trust of that content. So things that are important when looking at these models is, where is the provenance from? Is there toxicity? Is there bias? And some of this can actually be analyzed statistically. It's a different type of challenge because these technologies present different styles of drift and parameterization, but it is measurable, and it's always you should be checking the confidence level, if you like. And for that risk, it's also aligned to business outcome. If you're building something like a marketing creative essay, that might be more tolerant to things like bias or drift or content generation. But if you're providing decisions to citizens or services with a high degree of accuracy or regulation, then you actually need a deeper level of trust index, if you like, on these tools. So it's a new challenge. We used to call some of this data governance. Now this is an AI governance challenge. And I think that's an area that is our next step of demand.
Absolutely. I didn't hear that word specifically. I've read a lot about AI ethics, but AI governance is something that is a term I really like, and I think we should definitely put that up for the next panel. Moving to some of the questions from the audience again, and let me go do one which is specifically directed at Dama. Let me project the question, which is from Vincent. I have a question for Dama. How does the data framework or the data management framework evolve during the last years, and a lot of the body of knowledge is obviously still the same? Is it because the questions, or that it's still relevant to answering these AI questions, or is there a need for an update based on this new technology? What's your thinking?
I think is a double-folded answer. One is depending on the nature of DEMA as a non-for-profit association based on volunteers, therefore is not a commercial entity with certain manpower, if you want to be behind, a certain target and certain reactivity. So I think there is something that's connaturated with the setting of DEMA. But I think even more important is the second part, which is it is about the DNA of DEMA and the way we approach changes. And what I think is quite evident, we will never able, apart from DEMA, nobody will ever be able, even in the education front, to be up to speed with the technology. Let's think about what you see in high school. We have a few programs to try to address kids and speak about the data. And I think any one of them has one of these in their hand, but nobody taught them, if you want, how to use it. Where when you drive a car, of course, there is a driving license, and think about how much more powerful is what they are. So there is an understanding that education will never be up to speed with the way technology moves. But I think the real point here is the mindset. And there is what I think is something more robust, something that could stay. And so when we think about some of the framework that the DAMA provides, I think it's still valid because it still speak about the fundamentals, it still speak about the needs rather than the how to do it. JM before spoke about electricity, and there is always this anecdote about Ford speaking. If I were asking what people wanted to do, it would be what they would want is to have faster horses. So there is always an important, the important thing is to know what people want is to go from A to B. And that is where everything should revolve around. And that is where I think in DAMA DNA, there is to address the core topic, the core discipline. And this has remained the same throughout the years. Having said that, we are looking at refreshing the DMBOK, which is currently in its second version, will be in the third version in a few months. But I think that was the main reason for it.
Good, thank you so much. I really like your analogy around if you want to drive a car, you need to get a driver's license, go through a formal education, if you want to call it. But then for some of this other technology that is also very powerful and which could influence a lot of decisions these days, basically it's open and everyone can use it. So that brings me to my next question, and you specifically mentioned Jean-Michel here as well, so I think it's a good question for him. Should we have some form of a driver's license for using AI solutions?
It's a difficult one, because how do you know you use AI?
I only ask difficult questions.
For example, I don't have a driver license for unlocking my phone.
Yeah.
Each time I unlock my phone, I use AI.
Yeah.
When I search my photo on my phone using text, I use image recognition with machine learning. I'm using AI every single day without noticing. As Kieran mentioned, it's pervasive. Have you seen AI? It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, you have those explicit tools, which are more, I would say, you can notice them because they are labeled as AI tools, so to speak. For example, if you program, you have tools that are going to generate your code. And today they are pretty good at generating 80% of your code. Whether it's SQL, whether it's Python, Java, C, C++, whatever, they're pretty good because code is for machines. And you have a machine that generates codes for machine. I never understood why humans should write code for a machine, since the machine can generate code for itself.
Yeah.
So, which is a nice closing the loop. Now, using AI, for example, when I open my mobile bank app, for example, for Singapore resident, without naming any bank, you have 3 major banks, and when you open your app, you have AI that is going to recommend you something, and you cannot avoid it. You have a suggestion of what thing to invest, a suggestion on how much you need to save, etc. It's all about with machine learning. Now, for the tool that are powered by AI, you may want to consider if the portion that is powered by AI is influential on the outcome, you may want to be more careful. Unlocking my phone is not really consequential as long as I want to do something with my phone. Now, using a driver, using a safe driving car, it's just a normal car, except it has software, but every single car has a lot of software in it. Any car has millions of lines of code inside. Now, for those self-driving cars, the plus is there is no longer any driver. And then this is where the attention needs to be taken care of, because there are consequences. So I think it's more about when you are using a tool that may kind of, quote, decide for yourself, you may want to be careful on using that tool. And it can be any tool. It can be you switch on electricity and automatically the electricity is going to be dimmed. There is no consequence. So you are not going to pay attention when you use this one. But if you use another tool that has that, for example, you use a tool like a drone. You are using a drone with AI, because drones have AI embedded, and you want to propagate some pesticide or something like that to treat agricultural field, and you rely on AI to choose what to do. Now you may want to be careful because, well, if the drone goes over an habitation, over an house, well, and it propagates everything, well, there are consequences. But then the same drone on top of a field, you will be very comfortable using it. So it's really the usage of the same tool to make sure, back to the previous comment, to make sure that the usage doesn't harm people, and it's more, I mean, for good, so to speak.
So would you say in that sense that it's more of a context question?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will be within the context. Will decide whether it's harmful or benign to use AI with the tool that you want to use. Regardless of the tool, whether it's a software tool, whether it's a mechanical tool, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, I like that approach, and this context is kind of for me also a nice bridge towards my next question, which is going to be for Kieran, because one of the questions that I saw in the question box is coming from Timothy Decano. And let me put it on the slide. It says, will citizen data scientists become similar to citizen journalists who practically have very little background on journalistic principles and have posed great challenges to formal media outlets? So the reason I'm picking this question is because it kind of builds around that context question. Can we use AI if I have never written a line of code and I now make a nice SQL question through any kind of Gen AI machine? It's likely to work. But will I trust information that is coming from a journalist that is using Gen AI? Or let me expand this question even further. Would I take medical advice from a specific chatbot? And that's kind of the question. So what's your view on that for those more contextual kind of questions?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And also to go to what Jan was saying earlier, I'll cover some of the context here, because there is a question of accountability as well as intent. And the reason why I mention that is I was at a defense summit yesterday, and they actually use AI very deliberately, but they are very aware of accountability as well. So when we talk about, say, departments or certain agencies, they do, if you like, need a license to operate their IA responsibly, but their intent is very specific. I think this question here around, by democratizing information and making it more accessible, it makes us in a way all generalists. We can very easily harvest information and therefore purport to have some expertise. I've seen people present at summits by using ChatGPT and representing that as content, but perhaps not being fully informed that that is potentially generic and occasionally misleading. So in the case of, for example, the difference between journalism, which is a challenge because content is so free and consumable and often clickbait through many sites, versus medical analysis, there is accountability for medicine. And I think it's also about that level of impact and accountability that is different here. If we want to enable people to be general consumers of information, then enabling citizen data scientists to get accurate and insightful information within the walls of our business, I encourage. However, taking that information and representing it as a specific product or service requires a higher level of rigor. And that's why I think, back to this license question, is we will occasionally see regulation, rules and policies driving this as well. So you can be an amateur data consumer in the context of maybe just answering general information, but for regulated industries or citizen services, I don't think we have an appetite to accept that.
Absolutely. The point that you mentioned, and that really triggered me, is around everyone is becoming a generalist because the data is so freely available. That ties into a nice question that I saw also in the question box. I'm going to ask this one to Nino. And the question is coming from Louis. And the question is, how is the role of the data scientist is evolved and impact, obviously, due to these technologies is reshaping? And how can I set myself apart from other kinds of roles? So we just learned from Kieran that everyone can find all easy information easily. So now if you still want to become a specialist, what should you do?
I think it's I think I would start one step before that, is even on the definition of what we mean by data scientist or citizen data scientist. But and why I'm saying that is because I think that a lot of us is already a citizen data scientist without knowing. And I think the key when we first developed this concept or this topic was try to create something that was complementary to the data scientist role itself. And it was based on the idea of business understanding, subject matter expert, which we all are in our area of expertise, is a professional or personal or by interest. And I think these are kind of the key elements. Therefore, we should consider there is data scientists that are by trade. There is now universities picking up. There are formal degrees. There are formal understanding. There are certain hard topic to learn, certain tool to be used, where to complement, if you want, the demand on this role, there's been this creation of this idea about citizen data scientists. Now, I want to refer back to Dema, but not because I'm obsessed with Dema, but it's just to say, in the past we were talking about business data stewards, and now is less fancy as a word, but I think the key concept or some of the key element of that definition still applies. Is the idea about a conduit, a liaison between the business, a translator, so someone that can understand what the business wants. I think Kieran did mention this already in the past, and being able to translate it into something that the IT, ICT, or the technical people can actually develop and implement. Now, there are sort of underlying principle is not only it does require a set of skills that may be very different. It's a lot about engaging. It's a lot about, I don't want to say be nice with people, but it's really about be empathic with people. It's really this communication aspect, this soft skill are very, very relevant. The second set of very important skills are your subject matter expert. Now, let's just think, try to put a finance person and a data warehouse developer in the same room. How could these two people communicate? It's just someone understanding accounting, the other understanding coding. It's pretty much an impossible task. And that is where I'm saying where subject matter expert, people that can communicate or try to translate is very important. This is where I think each one of us, to one extent, will have their area of expertise where they can apply this sort of translation, communication, and add on information.
Very good. I like that idea of a translator is somewhere in the middle. So maybe we could ask AI to create that translator for service for us. Another key point that I kind of wanted to balance on is that interpretation is not always straightforward, and it's typically governed by rules, regulations. We've already established that a bit before. So that's why I would like to pick out the next question next, which is coming from Swaroop. And this one is going to be for Jean-Michel. You just mentioned banks and the apps that are recommending you all kinds of products and services to buy. So how does a organization, and this question is specifically around banking, finds a balance between that customer centricity and recommending all kinds of products and services and regulatory compliance from a data democratization perspective, and how do you see this?
That's fantastic. There's this concept of fairness, and it has been going on in the banking sector for a long time. I mean, machine learning exists for the last 30 years. Nothing is new. AI, I did my first AI course was in 1989, sorry. That was called Expert System at that time. Kieran may relate. So there is this concept of fairness. Any regulator, especially in insurance industry and banking industry, wants to know when you recommend something to somebody, especially financial instrument, financial services, is it fair? They want to know what are the main criteria, which we call features, in data science that are used to determine whether we should recommend this product or this product. For example, in insurance, we calculate the premium. And calculating the premium is important because either you pay less or you pay more.
Yeah.
And if you are not fair, somebody may pay way more instead of paying less because you have a bias towards women, you have a bias towards younger people who have more accidents, car accident, and all those type of things. So fairness is super important. And in regulated industry, high regulated industry, like banking, like insurance, it's everywhere, and you can still have be focused on your customer, but when you recommend something, you're trying to avoid bias and you try to be fair.
Yeah.
And even if I go back to the electricity, it's the same concept. Every single country has what we call an electricity grid. And when you have power, central power, whether it's nuclear power or coal power, or those type of things, you produce electricity, it goes to the grid, and then you have very complex machine learning algorithm that decide where do you send power. Do you send power to homes, to industries? And you always do some arbitrage. And that arbitrage, you're trying to be as fair as you can, but sometimes you can no longer produce electricity because everything is dry, you have no more huge reservoir with water. And in that case, well, you just ask, okay, the state is going to do a trade-off.
Yeah.
No more electricity between 2 hours that day because, sorry guys, we cannot produce.
Yeah.
So that's fairness across customers. I think it's will always to be there. So you cannot just recommend anything under the sun to anyone.
Yeah.
That's not possible.
Very interesting, and I think that I kind of found the biggest paradox of this whole conference is because that concept of fairness is ultimately still a human decision, isn't it?
Yes, it's not the machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to prove to the regulator that your algorithm is relatively fair, so you don't end up with this category of people, so to speak, will always pay more, regardless, because there is some bias, because the training data that you use was not complete, which lead to a bias of your algorithm when you deploy your algorithm into your system.
Interesting. We're going super fast through the time, and I could easily fill another hour. But I would like to kind of make the full circle round and one more time kind of go through all three of you for some closing thoughts, but also some closing remarks. And I'd like to go back to the original question because we have been talking about truth, fairness, the way in which machine learning algorithms is trained. I'd like to bring it back full circle towards upskilling for the data democracy. And I'd like to all of you to kind of keep it brief because we only have a few minutes left. But if you were to kind of give one piece of final advice on how either individuals or governments or corporations can work around upscaling for this data democracy that is coming. Obviously, this is a conference around learning. What would that advice be? And I would like to start with Kieran, and then I go to Nino, and then Jean-Michel, you can start with the closing words.
Yeah, certainly. Probably one of the fastest innovation communities on the planet. So my advice is become AI savvy and aware. Start with any tool or technology of comfort, but the intention here is that people who understand these technologies will have better decision making and greater awareness and probably more effective business impact than people who do not. So I certainly encourage learning these tools and joining that innovative community.
Thank you so much, Kieran. Really appreciate that. Let's move to Nino.
I think there is an aspect about when we talk about democratization, does it mean also to involve more people? And what we see very often with innovation, it can tend to be a top-down approach. So there is a new technology, go and use it. What I think is important is, in this case, it could be to involve the users into the definition of what are their needs, what are their requirements, what we are trying to address, rather than assume we know what those needs are and then find a solution. I think that different paradigm is really could bring a different solution and different evolution to the whole topic.
Absolutely, and I fully agree with you, especially on that it's going to be this more evolution, and it's not going to stop here or today or not even tomorrow. Jean-Michel, final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I will be very much in line with Kieran. Get yourself comfortable with new AI tools. If you are a data practitioner, I urge you to get comfortable with SQL generation, Python generation, PySpark generation, because the person who are comfortable with this one is going to steal your job. Mm-hmm. And it's going extremely fast. Today, any data practitioner now can interrogate data warehouse, and the code is generated between multiple tables, etc. So whether you like Google, go to Gemini and trying to learn Gemini with Google AI Studio, trying to do with ChatGPT, do something. Start to be familiar with those type of tool set, IBM Watson as well. But please be familiar with it. Take some training course of like generative AI in a high level with all the concepts. You don't need to understand large language model. That's not very useful if you are a data practitioner. However, you need to understand what those can do for you before it's too late.
Absolutely. I think that's some very good closing remarks. Do something and get familiar. And I think that's kind of a good summary of what we would need to do in order to upskill for a data democracy. With that, unfortunately, we're getting towards the end of this panel. I would like to thank Nino, Jean-Michel, and Kieran tremendously for sharing their thoughts and expertise. I see a lot of smiley faces going up and clapping hands, so I'm quite sure the audience liked it. To the audience, I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer all questions because there were so many coming in, but I hope that I picked the right ones, and I'm quite sure that if you want to get in touch with any of our panelists, that you can reach out to them on either LinkedIn or through any of the other social media, or maybe even through the different language models. With that, I'm going to close this particular session because behind me, at least in the virtual sense of the world, we already have our next sessions up and running. And we're going to, in less than 5 minutes, go to Randy Bean, who is the founder and CEO of the Data and AI Leadership Exchange, and he is going to be talking about the state of data and AI in industry. On the other session, we're having Mohammed Usman Haider, who is a solution architect in data and artificial at a telecom provider, and he is going to talk about the role of big data in advancing generative AI. And before I do that, I just got a message from our team members that I forgot about the poll, which we need to do in order to win some prizes at the end of this conference. So let me recapture one particular slide. And this is for everyone who had, this is the final question. Winners will be announced during the part. Let me quickly start this so that we can make sure that everyone who wants to win these training courses, books, etc., that they can do this. The question is, and Jean-Michel, please don't give the answer, how many search queries does Google process on average per second?
More than one.
More than one, that's for sure. Good. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. Good. And I'm going to close the poll. 44%, oh, 47, a last minute change. 47% says 59,000 and 53% says 99,000 serious queries per second. Jean-Michel, would you know?
I would have to Google it. I'm not sure.
They've not shared the answers with me in order to make sure that I don't give it away. So all the answers, all the questions are going to be made available during the closing ceremonies, which is going to happen a few hours from now. With that, I'm going to close this session. Thanks everyone for participating. It's been a wonderful panel discussion again. And once again, thanks so much towards our panelists for being with us today. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.